You people always play the victim card. The words slice through the air like a slap. Candace Owens stands, hands clenched around the mic, voice trembling not with fear but fury. Her eyes scan the panel table, then settle on one face. Rep. Jasmine Crockett. The crowd, caught between shock and fascination, falls into stunned silence. You could hear a pin drop. You build your whole careers on fake oppression, Candace snarls, her voice climbing. Meanwhile, I speak facts and get labeled a traitor. Why? Because I don't fit your woke little narrative. Gasps ripple through the room. Some audience members shift in their seats. A woman in the third row covers her mouth. A man reaches for his phone, already recording. This is no longer just a panel. It's a moment, a flashpoint, a collision of two visions of America. Jasmine Crockett doesn't flinch. Her hands are folded, her eyes steady. Her expression of practiced calm honed in courtrooms, campaign stages, and hearing rooms remains unchanged. She lets the words hang, heavy and awkward, as if waiting for the echo to finish embarrassing itself. Candace leans forward, hungry for a reaction. She's baiting her. But Repser Crockett breathes in, once measured, poised, and tilts her head slightly. The silence stretches. Then, finally, she speaks. Well, she begins softly. If being calm under fire makes me a victim, you may want to check your definition of strength. The room tilts. You can feel it not just a comeback, but a redirection, a disarming counterstrike. A reminder that decency, not volume, holds the real weight. Candace blinks. Just once. A beat too long. And then freeze. The image halts mid-frame. Jasmine Crockett mid-sentence. The crowd beginning to stir. History pausing for breath. Voiceover. But to understand how we got here, why one moment of truth could spark a political firestorm, we have to rewind. Because this wasn't just another panel. This was a reckoning, a clash between chaos and clarity, noise and nerve, fiction and fact. And what Repers Crockett said next would silence the room and light up the internet. It was billed as just another Saturday Forum. The banner read, Accountability in Politics, Voices from the Front Lines. Hosted in Atlanta by a national civic coalition, the event was meant to be a civil discussion, a conversation between rising political voices on ethics, transparency, and public trust. No red carpet, no roaring crowds, just a modest auditorium, a few cameras and folding chairs lined with expectation. But the organizers had made one bold decision: seat Candace Owens and Repers Jasmine Crockett side by side. On paper, it looked inspired. Two black women in politics, different parties, different philosophies, but shared visibility in the national spotlight. What better way to model civil discourse? Except this wasn't going to be civil, because beneath the shared identity, the similarities stopped cold. These weren't just ideological rivals. They were walking rebuttals to each other's very existence. Candace Owens, the conservative firebrand, had built her brand on defying expectations. She spoke not just against systemic racism, but against the idea that it ever existed. Her followers called her brave. Her critics called her a performance. Jasmine Crockett, by contrast, was the real deal. A former public defender. A congresswoman shaped by lived experience, not camera angles. Her voice, soft but unwavering, carried the weight of communities. She never stopped fighting for even when no one was watching. They weren't just from different parties. They were from different realities. And the stakes? They weren't policy bullet points. They were personal. Because when black women rise in politics, the world watches closely but not always kindly. The pressure to represent, to behave, to avoid the angry label, it's relentless. And on that stage, two women carried that weight in radically different ways. One chose confrontation, the other, conviction. The first 30 minutes were civil, barely. A moderator opened with questions about ethics reform. The panelists offered measured takes. Candace leaned into talking points. Jasmine referenced legislation she'd co-sponsored. A few polite laughs. Applause. But tension was building. You could feel it in the way Candace interrupted. How Jasmine didn't blink. How the moderator nervously cleared her throat between answers. This wasn't a panel. It was a fuse, inching closer to the flame. Because Candace wasn't there to discuss accountability. She was there to disrupt it, and when the conversation turned toward race in policymaking, that fuse finally met fire. Candace called racial equity programs modern segregation. Jasmine calmly replied, "Equity is giving people shoes. Equality is assuming everyone has feet." The crowd leaned in. Candace snapped, "That's just victim politics." And then she said it. "You people always play the victim card." The room gasped. Phones came out. And history was about to be made not because two politicians disagreed, but because one refused to be reduced. Because one woman's silence was more deafening than another's shout. What started as policy talk would soon spiral into one of the most viral confrontations of the year. Not because it was loud, but because it was true. And in a country addicted to noise, the world was about to hear what dignity sounds like. To understand what exploded on that stage, you have to understand Candace Owens, not the name, but the brand. She didn't enter politics the traditional way. No slow climb through city councils or grassroots campaigns. Candace Owens stormed into public consciousness through the side door clicks, sound bites, and the culture wars. A former liberal who pivoted hard right, she branded herself as the ultimate disruptor. A black woman who attacked black victimhood from inside the house. Her rise was digital and aggressive. YouTube clips with titles like "There is no police brutality crisis" and "Feminism is cancer" racked up millions of views. She didn't debate, she detonated. Her words weren't meant to persuade, but to polarize. And in an algorithm-driven age, polarization pays. Networks ate it up. Conservative outlets placed her on prime panels. She became a fixture on Fox News, at CPAS, on university stages where security had to be increased, just in case. She claimed she was silenced even as her microphone grew louder. To her fans, Candace was fearless, unapologetic, the woman who said what others wouldn't. To her critics, she was a performance. Because under the surface of her "facts don't care about your feelings" persona was a blueprint. Provoke emotion, claim victimhood, then capitalize on the fallout. It was outrage as strategy. She mocked George Floyd's death. She dismissed systemic racism as a myth. She said on camera that if slavery came back, not all black people would be victims. And yet, somehow, she called herself an advocate for truth. But her truth was selectively deployed. She attacked single motherhood in black communities while ignoring the policies that helped create that dynamic. She railed against government dependence while enjoying lucrative speaking fees from taxpayer-funded campuses. She shouted down identity politics, then weaponized her own identity as a shield when challenged. The contradiction wasn't a flaw. It was the point. Candace Owens didn't debate issues. She embodied them loudly, strategically, and without pause. Her power came not from what she said, but how she said it, and who she said it against. That night, she wasn't just sparring with another panelist. She was performing for her audience, an audience primed to see any pushback from a black Democrat as the real racism. So she leaned in. She turned the volume up. She locked eyes with Jasmine Crockett and sharpened her tongue like a blade. Because Candace didn't fear confrontation. She thrived on it. The more tension in the room, the more clicks outside it. It was theater, and she always cast herself as the protagonist fighting a woke mob, a corrupt media, an imaginary enemy made real through rhetoric. But something was different this time. This wasn't a solo performance, because across from her sat someone who wasn't playing the game. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch, didn't match the volume, didn't take the bait. And that more than anything was disarming. Candace's strategy depended on escalation, but Crockett gave her none. So Candace doubled down, louder, harsher, meaner. "You're not a leader, you're a liability," she spat, her voice laced with contempt. But with every word, her argument thinned. Her volume rose, but her logic faltered. The audience wasn't cheering. They were watching, weighing. And that's where Candace Owens, unfiltered, unedited, unrestrained, revealed her true weakness. Because the louder she got, the more desperate she seemed. And the more composed her opponent remained, the more Candace unraveled. She came to that stage expecting a brawl. What she got was a mirror. And for the first time in a long time, Candace Owens was forced to see herself not through the adoration of fans or the framing of editors, but through the unblinking calm of someone who refused to shout back. She didn't expect that. She wasn't ready for it, because power, real power, isn't always loud. Sometimes it just waits. Patient, poised. And across from her sat someone very different. Before the applause, before the trending hashtags, before the mic drop that silenced a firebrand, Jasmine Crockett was just a girl from St. Louis raised by working-class parents who believed in books, boundaries, and backbone. She wasn't groomed for politics. She was shaped by something far older: struggle. Jasmine grew up watching her mother juggle jobs and dignity, refusing to bend under a system designed to break people like her. Sundays were for sermons. Mondays were for resilience. By the time she was 12, Jasmine had learned the sacred power of listening and the revolutionary act of speaking only when it mattered. She didn't dream of podiums or press. She dreamed of justice. That dream led her to law school, and then into public defense, a path where the pay is low, the cases are heavy, and the clients are too often forgotten. While others chased partnerships, Jasmine chased purpose. She stood beside the accused when no one else would. She defended young men written off by the headlines. She fought in courtrooms that still didn't know how to pronounce names that sounded like her own. Her job wasn't to make excuses. It was to make the system answerable to itself. It was in those courtrooms that she learned the language of power. Not rage, not ego, but precision. She didn't shout. She struck. One sentence at a time. One precedent at a time. And judges noticed. So did the community. In 2019, when police violence gripped the country in a new wave, Jasmine wasn't tweeting. She was organizing. She wasn't pointing fingers, she was demanding body cams. She wasn't waiting for someone else to run. She filed the paperwork herself, and she won. She entered the Texas House and then Congress, not as a polished political climber, but as a woman who knew exactly what she was walking into. She'd been underestimated her whole life. She carried every "you're not qualified" and "you're too angry" like armor, but Jasmine Crockett didn't come to fit in. She came to tell the truth whether the room was ready or not. There's a clip from a congressional hearing, one of her first, where a senior colleague tries to lecture her on decorum. Jasmine doesn't raise her voice. She waits, lets him finish, then says, "If decorum means I sit silent while truth is distorted, I must respectfully decline." The room froze. The clip went viral. That was her style. Not flashy, but surgical. She understood that identity wasn't a prop, it was a platform. Being a black woman in Congress wasn't her brand. It was her reality. One she carried not for clout, but for those who still didn't see themselves reflected in the marble halls of power. She showed up to work. She read every page of every bill. She challenged quietly, but relentlessly. And when cameras showed up, she didn't switch tones. She didn't pivot into performance. She stayed rooted, because Crockett's superpower wasn't sound. It was silence used well. So when she took that stage in Atlanta, she wasn't intimidated. She'd debated prosecutors. She'd stared down racism wrapped in respectability. A political panel was child's play compared to pleading for mercy for a teenager on trial for survival. She knew Candace Owens before she met her, not personally, but ideologically. She'd met versions of her in courtrooms, on talk shows, at dinner tables. Women who had traded nuance for noise, who mistook provocation for bravery. Jasmine didn't hate her. She pitied her. Because where Candace wielded identity like a weapon, Jasmine wore it like a compass. And so as Candace began her performance volume rising, rhetoric sharpening, Jasmine didn't interrupt. She listened. Not because she was weak, but because she knew the power of restraint. She knew that letting someone unravel themselves was far more effective than rushing to stop them. And when the moment came, the insult, the line that made the room gasp, Jasmine didn't flinch. She'd been insulted before. She'd been underestimated before. She'd been here before. She adjusted her mic, leaned in not forward, not aggressively, but with intention. And she said the first of many sentences that would turn a viral insult into a national reckoning. Because Jasmine Crockett doesn't clap back, she corrects, with facts, with grace, with stakes so much higher than ego. And in that moment, the crowd wasn't just seeing a politician. They were seeing a mirror of strength, of calm, of what leadership looks like when it's not auditioning for applause. Candace had built her platform on volume. Jasmine had built her legacy on values. And that night, one was about to collapse in real time. Because while Candace screamed to be heard, Jasmine whispered to be understood. And that difference? Candace was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The panel had just turned to the topic of criminal justice reform. The moderator, keeping her tone hopeful, asked each speaker what accountability looked like in practice, not just speeches, but policy. Jasmine Crockett nodded slightly, her pen resting against a notebook she hadn't yet opened. Candace Owens smirked before the mic even reached her. "Well," Candace began, dragging out the word like an invitation to a fight, "we could start by not pretending every issue in the black community is someone else's fault." A few in the crowd stiffened. She continued, "We talk about accountability, but what we really mean is deflection. We blame history. We blame systems. We blame the police. But God forbid we talk about culture, absent fathers, failing schools, glorifying victimhood." Her voice was sharp, practiced, weaponized. Jasmine didn't move. Candace turned toward her not directly but close enough to fire a shot. "And I find it funny," she said, eyes narrowing, "that we have politicians, black politicians who profit off that narrative. People like you, Congresswoman Crockett, always ready with a tweet, always quick to call racism. But what have you actually done?" The crowd murmured. A few leaned forward. Others exchanged glances. Jasmine remained still. Candace pressed on, "Isn't it easier to scream systemic racism than it is to tell people the truth? That personal responsibility matters? That crime isn't a conspiracy, it's a consequence?" Now she was rolling. "You talk about justice," she snapped. "But when a black man shoots another black man, where's the outrage? Where's the protest? Where's the hearing?" More murmurs. A woman near the front shook her head, whispering something to the man next to her. Candace saw it. "Oh, I see. I'm not allowed to say that, right? Because it disrupts the narrative. Because people like Crockett built a career on telling our community that they're powerless, that they're victims." Now she turned directly toward Jasmine. "You don't represent black people. You represent a brand, and your brand is weakness." A pause. No one breathed. The moderator opened her mouth as if to intervene, then stopped. Jasmine finally lifted her eyes from the notebook she hadn't written in. She met Candace's gaze, not with fire, not with fury, with stillness, with certainty. kind of certainty that makes noise nervous. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't reach for the mic. She simply waited long enough for Candace's last words to echo off the walls and dissolve under their own weight. And still, she said nothing. That silence spread like fog, a slow, dense hush that pressed against every chest in the room. Candace tried to smirk again, but it faltered. Jasmine blinked once, then leaned forward, gently adjusted her microphone. And then she spoke. "Thank you, Candace," Jasmine said, her voice calm, her eyes steady. "Thank you for reminding the audience what chaos looks like when it's dressed up as conviction." The crowd reacted instantly, half in shock, half in release. A few chuckles rippled through the silence like wind through glass. Candace didn't flinch, but her jaw tightened. Jasmine turned to the moderator briefly, then looked back out at the room, not scanning for approval but grounding herself. "I think it's important," she continued, "that we start with some facts. Not emotions, not algorithms, but facts." She unfolded a small piece of paper from her notebook and held it without fanfare. "In the communities you're so comfortable scapegoating, Candace, crime is a symptom, not a root cause. Poverty, disinvestment, systemic underfunding of schools, generational trauma, these are the foundations, not excuses, realities." She looked up. "In my district, the average school building is 50 years old. 50. Teachers spend their own salaries on pencils. Meanwhile, we talk about culture as if kids wake up wanting to fail." Applause, brief but earnest. Candace shifted in her chair. "But sure," Jasmine said with a controlled breath. "Let's talk about accountability." She folded the paper again, placing it neatly on the table. "You speak about absent fathers and crime statistics, as if you discovered them. I lived them. I worked with them. While you were in a studio building an audience on outrage, I was sitting across from mothers who had just lost their sons to bullets, begging me to get them justice the system had long stopped offering." The room was listening now, not just hearing, but feeling. I was in courtrooms where the only thing louder than the grief was the silence of a prosecutor's shrug. I didn't get paid to go viral. I got paid $50,000 a year to fight for people you reduced to punchlines." She paused. "Let me give you a number." The pause stretched. 78%, she said. A beat. "That's the percentage of crime committed against black people by other black people, yes. But here's the part you leave out every time. 82% of crime against white people is committed by other white people. It's not culture, it's proximity. It's neighborhood. It's sociology. But cherry-picking statistics without context makes it seem like pathology." Now the crowd applauded louder, clearer. "And before you accuse me of defending criminals, let me be clear. I believe in accountability. I also believe in honesty. I believe that solutions come after understanding, not before. And I believe weaponizing shame is not policy, it's performance." Candace opened her mouth slightly but said nothing. "I don't need to scream," Jasmine continued, "because my work is loud enough. You think because I don't match your volume I'm weaker? No, ma'am. I just don't confuse yelling with leadership." A cheer broke out, sustained now, rising. "But let's not pretend this is just about crime or culture," she said. "This is about narrative. This is about who gets to define respectable. You call my voice dangerous? Because it doesn't fit your brand? Because I don't nod? While you insult communities you haven't stepped foot in unless there's a camera?" Jasmine let the words settle. She didn't rush. "You claim to speak for Black America, but you've never carried their burdens. You've commodified their pain. You didn't break barriers, you monetized them." Gasps, a few claps, a shouted, "Yes," from the back. "See, I'm not in Congress because it was convenient. I'm there because I was tired of watching people, like you, rewrite truth for profit." She turned slightly in her seat, now facing Candace fully. "I get it. Rage sells. Provocation sells. But when the lights go off and the views slow down, what's left? I go back to a district I love, to schools I fight to fund, to families I actually know. You go back to a studio. That one landed, even Candace blinked. And as for my brand? Jasmine smiled softly. It's dignity. The crowd was on its feet now. Not all, but many. She looked at the audience not for approval, but for connection. You don't have to scream to be heard, she said. And you don't have to insult your people to prove independence. She leaned back. My grandmother used to say, still water runs deep. I never understood it until I sat across from people who confused noise with depth. The room was still. Even the applause had paused for a breath. And so respectfully, I'm not here to out-yell you. She reached forward, adjusted her mic one last time. I don't scream to be heard, she said, her voice low, deliberate. Clear. I speak, so truth can echo. Silence. Then thunder. Applause broke like a wave across the room. Standing, roaring, prolonged. Candace didn't stand. She didn't clap. She looked ahead, stone still, her expression unreadable. But the room had chosen. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just defended herself. She had reframed the debate. She had reclaimed the narrative. She had reminded a crowd, no, a country, that courage isn't always loud. The room erupted, but what happened online was even bigger. The applause was still fading when the first tweets hit the timeline. No captions, just the video. A 30-second clip of Jasmine Crockett leaning into the mic and saying, I don't scream to be heard. I speak so truth can echo. By the time the panel ended, it had already crossed 10,000 views. 10 minutes later, it was trending. Crockett clapped back. It started with political junkies, then journalists, then TikTokers, then celebrities. One user added dramatic music behind her speech and slow-zoomed on Candace Owens's blank stare. Another posted a reaction video, hand over mouth, whispering, I've never seen someone get cooked this quietly. Within the hour, Crockett's name was on every platform. Instagram Reels split-screened her with famous mic-drop moments from courtroom dramas. Twitter turned her final line into a quote graphic. Influencers began weighing in. Black girl politic. Jasmine Crockett is her. Calm, collected, clinical. That's leadership. Legal queens. Imagine trying to drag a public defender and getting absolutely scalped with data and grace. Whoo. Woke at work. This is how you dismantle performative punditry. With receipts, not rage. Even those outside the political sphere chimed in. Lizzo reposted the clip with the caption, Say that! Ava DuVernay shared it, writing, A masterclass in power and poise. This is how we rise. Within 6 hours, the original panel was a footnote. This moment had become the moment. News outlets scrambled. Headlines read, Crockett stuns Owens with poised rebuttal. The Washington Post. Silence, then fire. The panel clapped back, heard round the country. MSNBC. Candace Owens gets schooled on live panel. Rolling Stone Fox. News tried to spin it. One host called Crockett condescending. But even they aired the clip twice. Meanwhile, civil rights organizations posted the full 10-minute exchange. The NAACP captioned it. This is what happens when knowledge meets noise. Color of Change wrote, Leadership isn't about volume. It's about values. Reprener's Jasmine Crockett showed the nation what both look like. It wasn't just online validation. Offline, something shifted too. A classroom in Philadelphia paused their civics lesson to watch the clip. A barbershop in Detroit played it on loop. In Houston, a high school senior rewrote her college admissions essay about what Jasmine's words meant to her. Crockett's staff started getting flooded not with press requests, but with thank yous. An email from a retired teacher. You reminded me why I used to believe in public service. A voicemail from a single mom. You didn't just speak for yourself. You spoke for all of us who've ever been talked over. Even a few unlikely sources weighed in. A Republican city council member from Georgia tweeted, "Didn't agree with everything, but respect the way Repsher Crockett held her ground. That's politics done right." But through it all, Jasmine remained quiet. She didn't do an interview blitz, didn't post a thread or a breakdown or a victory lap, just one. Tweet clarity over chaos, always. And that restraint again only amplified the contrast. Because while Candace Owens had made a career off of being loud, Jasmine Crockett had just made history by being clear. The internet didn't just notice. It rallied. Petitions circulated to have her host televised debates. Commentators began citing her in analysis pieces about the new face of progressive leadership. And across the country, for the first time in a long time, people who felt invisible felt seen. But for Jasmine, this wasn't about clout. It wasn't about trends or praise or going viral. It was about something deeper. The night after the panel, Jasmine Crockett posted just 8 words. Stay grounded. Stay honest. Let them scream. No follow-up. No hashtags. No viral breakdown thread. Just a simple reminder in her tone, in her style, that power doesn't have to perform. The tweet went supernova, but for Jasmine, that was never the point. Days later, in a quiet sit-down interview with a local station back in Dallas, she reflected, "My job isn't to go viral," she said, her voice measured. "It's to serve." The interviewer asked about the moment, about the stare-down, the mic drop, the explosion online. Jasmine smiled faintly. "You know," she said, "sometimes people confuse being loud with being right. But I've spent too much time in courtrooms to make that mistake. The truth has a rhythm. You don't have to scream it. You just have to stand in it." She leaned back in her chair, not defensive, just grounded. We're living in a time where attention is currency. Rage is strategy. People want to be seen, more than they want to be understood. I get it. It works. But it's not why I'm here. The clip aired in full. It went viral too. Not because it was explosive, but because it was real. And for so many, it was exactly the antidote they didn't know they needed. Because we've grown used to chaos. We've become spectators to flame wars and insult exchanges, where whoever talks last or loudest wins. But Jasmine Crockett didn't play that game. She didn't meet fire with fire. She met noise with knowledge, ego with evidence, fury with focus. And in doing so, she didn't just win a debate. She revealed something deeper. That restraint is its own form of power. That dignity, when wielded with discipline, can cut sharper than cruelty. That leadership isn't about who takes up the most space, it's about who uses theirs with purpose. Candace Owens had walked onto that stage armed for battle. Jasmine Crockett came carrying truth. And while the world expected sparks, what they witnessed was a shift in tone, in presence, in what politics could feel like again. Because Crockett didn't insult her opponent. She invited the audience to think bigger. She didn't claim to have all the answers. She simply refused to distort the questions. And perhaps that's why her words rang louder than a scream ever could. Because in a moment when the easy path was retaliation, she chose reflection. In a time when shouting is standard, she chose substance. And in doing so, she reminded us of something we've almost forgotten. That truth doesn't need to shout to be heard, that in a world addicted to spectacle, grace is radical. And that real leadership? It looks like Jasmine Crockett, shoulders back, voice steady, no theatrics, just clarity, just courage, just enough calm to shake the entire room. Candace Owens screamed on that stage, loud, pointed, relentless. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch, she didn't yell back. She didn't match chaos with chaos. She met it with clarity. And in that moment when she adjusted her mic, leaned in, and calmly dismantled the noise, she didn't just win a debate. She redefined what power looks like. In a world where performative rage gets clicks and empty provocation gets platforms, Jasmine Crockett reminded us that truth doesn't need theatrics. It just needs courage. So if you watched this and felt a shift, felt that pull in your chest that says, "This is what leadership should be," you're not alone. Millions did, because Crockett's calm wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Her restraint wasn't silence. It was command. And her words didn't just echo in that room, they're still echoing now. So here's the moment where you step in. If you believe leadership looks like calm under fire, if you believe dignity beats drama every time, if you believe facts, focus, and grace still matter in a world full of noise, then share this story. Amplify it. Subscribe, and be part of a movement that uplifts leaders who don't just perform, but transform. Because the world doesn't need more shouting. It needs more clarity. And voices like Jasmine Crockett's, they don't just deserve our attention, they deserve our action.